podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twit event number 6, recorded March 5th, 2020. From WWT, the future of tech in the cloud. Today's event is brought to you by Worldwide Technology. Worldwide Technology's Advanced Technology Center is like no other testing and research lab with more than $500 million of equipment, including solutions from key partners like HPE and Intel. And because it's virtual, you don't have to come here to St. Louis. You can access it anywhere in the world 24/7. To learn more about Worldwide Technology, the Advanced Technology Center, and become a member of their growing community, go to wwt.com/twit. Hello, everybody. I'm Leo Laporte, and we are at the WWT World Headquarters in St. Louis. What a beautiful facility this is. We've been taking a tour of the Advanced Technology Center that they've built here. It's really a remarkable story. And we got to go in and touch the servers. It was a lot of fun. What we've done is we've assembled a panel of great experts here to talk about the future of tech in the cloud. And I'm going to introduce our panel, and then we can get going. Mike Dorosh is here. He's a Senior Director for Technology and Service Providers at the Gartner Group. Mike, it's great to have you. He's the pickle expert. If you have any pickle questions, he's a Senior Research Analyst in Gartner's Technology and Service Provider Group, covering cloud services in the market, managed services, and the intersection of IT services and cloud. He talks about service product development, offering management, startups, hybrid cloud, strategic outsourcing, cloud migration, deployment technologies, cloud management platforms, the business of technology, and pickles. And beer.
Mostly pickles.
Mostly pickles, some beer. It's great to have you, Mike. Thank you for coming out.
Great to be here.
To my left is Mary Jo Foley, who, as some of the Twit listeners know, is our host of Windows Weekly every Wednesday in our Twit network. But she's also a much esteemed technology analyst. For 30 years in a variety of publications. She blogs about Microsoft on ZDNet's All About Microsoft blog at allaboutmicrosoft.com. And she once wrote a book, which she has pledged never to do again.
Definitely.
Microsoft 2.0, How Microsoft Plans to Stay Relevant in the Post-Gates Era. Did it all come out the way you thought it would?
Surprisingly, mostly.
A lot of cloud in there.
A lot of cloudy things.
Yeah.
Yep.
And sitting to her left, Alex Lindsay. Most of you know Alex from many of our shows. He created Mac Break and is a regular on Mac Break Weekly, our Macintosh show. But he's also kind of a genius of streaming and cloud production. He's head of production at 090 Media, a live streaming services company. Maybe you don't know this, but his introduction to the cloud was when he was working at Industrial Light and Magic, rendering shots for Episode 1 of Star Wars.
It was a local cloud.
Queen.
But it was the first time we had introduction to 2,000 processors and scheduling that and processing. You know, like you had to think in many of the same ways.
Yeah.
Where you weren't working with your own local computer, you were working with a box or a host of boxes somewhere else.
Right. He's actually managed over 2,000 online events for companies like Facebook, Google, and Salesforce. You left out the White House, but we'll just take that as written. He's actually been down the back stairs in the White House. So. First of all, you know, I'm going to presume how many of you now, some of you are WWT employees, some of you are Twit listeners, but for those of you who are enterprise companies, how many of you are already doing business in the cloud? Most of you, right? Is there anybody who has turned their back on the cloud? No. That would be nuts, right? Especially in this day of coronavirus, the cloud is becoming more, you're kind of glad you have some cloud infrastructure right about now. Let me start with you, Mike, because you've been this is your business for a long time. Are there people who still say, "Oh, I don't want to be in the cloud. It's not safe. It's not on-prem." People who are still turning their backs on the cloud?
Yeah, strangely enough, in 2020, people still think cloud is one of these kind of scary things.
Really?
And, the famous T-shirt, the cloud's just somebody else's computers, right? It's literally the truth. And what we're seeing is, technology's adopted in waves, right? There's usually early adopters, there's mid-range adopters. So we're probably in the third or fourth wave of adoption at this time, depending on what you want to count, right?
Yeah.
But what's happened is I think the first time around, everybody tried to do it themselves. Right? And they learned some very bad lessons about leaving shares open and
people are still learning that lesson.
Or not changing admin passwords and things like that. And I also think that there was, in the early days, a fundamental misunderstanding that this really wasn't all that different. I mean, yes, there was some differences, but we've been doing these things in data centers for years. It was just something that wasn't completely under your control. So I think today, I mean, there's two big reasons I think customers are reluctant to go to the cloud, those that haven't at this point. The first of which is, you know, they believe that there's some sort of unique set of security, confidentiality, privacy, and data that precludes them from doing so. And generally, these aren't even the very largest customers. These are small and middle-sized companies. And then when you point out to them that, you know, there have been banks and governments now that are entirely running on top of the clouds, right? You know, and you know, I think that changes the mind. But the other one I think is just simply the age-old problem in technology, which is technical debt, right? So you think about the last 12, 15 years, right? Go back to 2008. If you were in the industry in 2008, you had a great couple of weeks, and then the crash happened. And within a year, you were laying off half of your company, if not more. I was at IBM at the time, and we laid off half of my team. And I think what happened is in that in the ensuing decade, we were understaffed, and IT was changed from being a cost center to even a drag on profitability in a lot of cases, right? And nobody invested. Nobody invested in apps. Nobody invested in infrastructure. You just kind of incrementally did what you had to do to keep things going. So fast forward a decade, and all of a sudden now IT is important again because of these little companies. You may have heard of them, Twitter, Facebook, Google, changed the way we interact with the world, right? And now everybody's scrambling to use the technology as leverage in business. And so consequently, I think that the people that are on the back end of adoption that are really reluctant are the ones that have probably 2 to 3 years worth of work just to get to a point where they can migrate, right? Their apps are custom-built apps that are 15 or 20 years old that nobody's quite sure what happens when you turn off this little bit, right? If it'll ever come back on again. Sometimes we have data, we have terabytes and terabytes of data. That's no longer a problem. The problem is the terabytes of data are spread across 10 different silos, some of which are never going to be able to be converted because they're in some sort of proprietary format. So I think it's a lot of the reluctance now is we waited too long to get started, and what we have to overcome is is just too much. The reality is for those companies, it's going to happen. Every industry's got a couple of apps that everybody uses. There's usually 2 or 3 vendors. All that stuff, the software business figured this out. If I don't have to install software everywhere, it's easier and cheaper and faster, and there's more value, and I don't have to negotiate a contract every time I introduce a new version. So all of these little kind of niche and industry software pieces that people run their business on that ran in data centers or ran in a closet down the hall are now going to cloud. And once that happens, your argument then becomes everything else gets dragged, right?
You know who's probably dragging these cloud holdouts along more than anybody else is Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft won't let you buy Office much longer that's not in the cloud, right?
Sort of. I mean, they're keeping as they call it, perpetual Office alive because there are people who really still have a real need and a real desire to run it that way. But I feel like the way Microsoft's dragged people along is they're strong. They've been a strong enterprise company on the software side.
People trust them.
They trust them. They're used to them. They know their products. And so when Microsoft comes to you and says, hey, you've been using Windows and Office and some of our other products locally and on your own servers, but you know what? We have this cloud thing. And we could run it for you even better than you can run it for yourself.
Right.
And that's kind of their pitch, and it's really winning over a lot of enterprises who already have those sales relationships with Microsoft.
I think people also probably feel a kinship to Microsoft because they were such a desktop company for so long, and then Satya Nadella comes along, and it's suddenly a cloud company.
Right.
And it's almost like, oh well, they're doing it, right?
Right.
And Azure's winning big contracts like the JEDI contract.
Yes, maybe.
Maybe. The courts let them.
We'll see. Yeah. I mean, they did win it, but we'll see if that gets overturned.
Right.
But there is something to be said about the brand. I
Right,
mean,
for
quite
sure.
honestly, a generation ago, nobody got
trustworthy-
fired for buying from IBM.
Right.
Made some very bad decisions buying from IBM at times, but and like any of the big technology companies, right?
Yeah.
There was a relationship. I think Microsoft, surprisingly, has managed to hang on to its brand value. We've been buying from you for 40 years, right? And more importantly, they've built on that brand value, right?
Right.
Alex, you of course do a lot of business in the cloud, but the kinds of things you do are so mission critical and so scary and so stressful. But there's no way you could not do it in the cloud, right?
Yeah, and really over the time went from when I started doing live streaming, which is a lot of what I do now, to when I started doing it to now, it went from we had a server somewhere that was doing the streaming, or we'd get a collection of servers, or there was like a little bit of something we had locally, to you can't do it now. Like it's not possible.
We used to have
because
8 Mac Minis.
Right.
We called it Streamosaurus, and each one was going to a different endpoint. Now, because of you, we're using Elemental from Amazon Web Service, and it's going up to the cloud.
Well, and then even there, we're working on a good example of that process. I mean, for instance, with live streaming, you can't really do live streaming on your own, even over AWS on your own. You're going to use the Elemental Cloud for that, and a lot of that has to do with peering.
Right.
So there's agreements between the CDNs and all the providers. If you don't have that, you're not going to have First Nation status, and means you're not going to be able to get it done. And so you really have to live inside of the cloud to get anything done. And one example of what we're working on right now, we have a high-profile client in India. And he does talks for a lot of people, and there's in 14 languages. So they've got 14 people doing actually interpretation, and then there's all these audio tracks.
Wow.
Now, and he travels all over India talking.
You
right?
could guess who this is if you think about it.
Anyway, so he travels around, and the problem you have is you're in smaller venues and bigger venues, and it's India, and you don't have necessarily great bandwidth.
Right.
Now,
Just completely unpredictable infrastructure, probably, right? You get
It's-
somewhere.
India's gotten better. In many of the cities, the bandwidth is actually really good. But because there's a lot of competition there right now, and so and if you have a relationship with the ISPs, you usually have a pretty good bandwidth. But if I want to stream 14 languages to YouTube and to Facebook, and I want primary and backup, that's 56 streams, that I'm sending out in all those languages. That is, I now need to request half a gigabit of bandwidth at the location to get all of that data out. Or I can take all the audio tracks, I can stack them up on the video, I can send them all into the Elemental, into Media Connect and Media Live. One stream with all of the because the audio is small, the video, but I'm only sending one video stream into the cloud. Once it gets into the cloud, you just piece it all out and send it all to all the places it needs to go, and it costs $3.50 a minute. But that would be a huge investment of hardware on site, of infrastructure to do that kind of event effectively. And right now, they're unable to do all of what they want because they have. So that's what we're architecting to fix. But that's a great example of how you're really using the cloud. We're not, it's not all cloud, but we are getting we're doing the work that we need to do on the ground, and then we're getting into the cloud as soon as it makes sense, using what they call a reliable UDP, a Zixi wrapper, to get it up there. And now we're able to distribute it everywhere relatively stably.
But it's one of the reasons I think cloud has really exploded, right? Because you couldn't have done this without the ubiquity of bandwidth.
Yeah.
Period of end of statement, right? I mean, let's face it. I mean, 30 years ago in Chicago, 128K ISDN line was only affordable by a trading house or a big company. Now I've got 1,000 times that coming into my household for $100 a month.
Yeah, the T1 used to be a big deal.
Yeah.
At 1.44 megabits.
Right, and you sold fractionals because nobody could afford to buy a full T, right?
Right.
Right, but I mean, so I think the bandwidth thing has really changed the way we think about things, and we got to talk about the plague, right? We got to talk about coronavirus. Think about this, guys. As bad as the economy,
plague.
yeah,
you
I'm
really
referring
think
it to
that's
the plague.
politic?
Yeah, well, you know what? I like I said earlier. I mean, here we are. The plague in the 14th and 15th century. We're doing the same things. You know how they fixed the plague in the 14th and 15th century? Wash your hands and lock the door.
Hasn't changed much.
Hasn't changed a bit, has it? But here's the reality, though, right? Think about the economic impact if there wasn't this bandwidth.
Right.
That's right.
Right? Think about this, right? Think about, I'm in Chicago, I know this part of the country. Think about the floods that happen in this part of the country every now and then. 50 years ago, companies went bankrupt when the Mississippi disrupted supply chain and the ability to get to work, right? Now, unless you're in a hands-on job, a job that has to physically touch something, you can work from anywhere.
So Mary Jo, you could make the argument really at this point that the cloud is superior in almost every way to on-prem.
You can make it, except in a couple cases. Like I just talked to somebody this week who was, I won't name company names, but worked for a big security company in New York. And he was saying there was a job he was doing that his boss said to him, well, of course you're going to put it in one of the clouds, right? And he said when he priced it, he decided no.
That was price.
Price, right. So, we always just say, I see a lot of people assume like, well, it's going to be more economical if you put something in the cloud, but that is not always the case.
Right.
There are certain cases where that argument cannot be made. I also think you got to talk about the hybrid cloud argument as well,
Absolutely.
right? There are a lot of Microsoft customers I know, as well as customers of other clouds, although they're kind of latecomers to this, Amazon and Google, the whole hybrid cloud acknowledgement. But there are people who, if Microsoft didn't have Azure Stack and didn't have a hybrid cloud story, I don't think they would be willing to kind of stick their toe in the water and ultimately try the cloud.
But is it just a wedge? Is it just a camel's nose, or is it
not
really
always.
something people need?
There are use cases where you can say, I need Azure Stack, I need the hybrid environment.
Right.
Microsoft always uses the cruise ship example of that, but there are a lot of other examples.
Is that where we get locked on a cruise ship
Yeah.
for 2 weeks?
off the coast?
I mean, Stack and hybrid and these things.
Yeah.
I mean, so first of all, we view the cloud as everybody's a hybrid cloud.
Right.
Right. Because quite honestly, there's outliers on both ends, right? There's probably about 2% of the total population of companies in cloud that are all in. There tend to be smaller companies that were born in the last 10 years, right? And there's 2% that will never go.
Right.
Right. But in the middle there, everybody has a IT department still, right? And there's stuff that just doesn't make sense, right? Whether it's economics, whether it's, it's a 10-year-old app and it does what we need it to do. And, when we get around to finally getting rid of this app, we'll figure that out. Or it's something that, because of what it is, we don't want out of our physical control.
Yeah.
We were in this situation, we're doing big, heavy video editing, right? And I'm not going to upload it to the cloud and work on it in the cloud. But the fires in Northern California, where we're located, shut us down. The power was out for almost a week. We couldn't do anything. And at that point, we started to look at a backup strategy on AWS to do that, start doing a lot of what we do in the cloud. And now that the coronavirus is coming to Northern California, we're glad we did, because while we haven't ever implemented it, we now have that capability. But Alex, you have a big global workforce. There are also issues with that. There's bandwidth issues, there's security issues. And what about Splinternet? I mean, we're starting to see a political situation that's going to make it difficult to use a truly international cloud.
Definitely, we see issues where, for instance, we stream events that people want to put into China. And that becomes a huge lift for us to figure out, what rights do we have, what do we have to do with the government? How do we have to sort this out? Is it a trusted partner? Is there, so there are definitely, there's like the whole world, and then there's China, Russia, and a handful of other ones that become this logistical process to get any data in and out of them. And for the most part, we deal with it on a case-by-case basis, and for the rest, everything else runs relatively smoothly. But even now, with all the bandwidth, I have artists that we work with in Rwanda, and when we pass files, most of it we can just pass files back and forth online. But there'll be times when if it's a lot of data, it's still faster to send. Like FedEx is still a really fast bandwidth. You can send terabytes of information in a couple days. It might take a long time to download that. In Africa. So you still end up moving, and there's still cases where we're moving drives to a large point that can upload that much data. If I've got 10 terabytes or 20 terabytes of data that needs to go up into the cloud, that becomes a different problem than if I...
It might be faster to mail it.
Well, it is. That's what I'm saying. It's easier to FedEx or mail it.
AWS is snowballs, right? So remember when those came out, everybody's looking at, who the hell's going to use this, right? Come on, we know how to do storage. No. The bandwidth of a FedEx truck is so much more reliable and better than the bandwidth of a network, right? And if you're moving a petabyte of data from your data center to AWS, you're not going to send it over the wire. Right? It's just not going to happen, right?
Well, and then the other thing is that we look at stability. Usually when we're doing one of our events, we are using multiple connections with multiple providers. So we look for...
Redundancy is important.
Right. Sorry? Redundancy, yeah. So we have, from the moment it leaves my box, I want two. I want two Ethernet connections going into two entire subsystems to get out of the building that go to two services that go into two different CDNs that then, then there's a player at the very end, and that's my only, single point of failure, that it has to decide which one. If I'm not getting bandwidth from this CDN, I'm now going to switch to this one.
That's actually a critical point. That's specific to your needs, the redundancy, because you're doing it live.
But we see it all the time when we work with other folks.
But I would imagine, yeah, Mike, in a lot of situations, how you use the cloud is going to very much depend on what you want to do with it.
Yeah, so there are emerging patterns we're seeing, right, about, certain types of industries do things certain ways, certain types of applications require certain or need certain things. But, fundamentally it's what we've been dealing with forever in IT and in data centers, right? Which is, what are the recs? How many processors, how much RAM, what kind of connection does it need? Does it need a 10 or a 100 connection, NIC card, right? Those types of things. What kind of security, right? And I would argue that, security is no more difficult in the cloud. It's just different.
Right.
Right. And
Well, you talk about hybrid IT teams where you
Right.
have differing needs.
right, but it's the same.
But it's still IT.
Right.
Right.
It's two sides of the same coin, if you will. It's just there's different shades on each side of the coin, right? But to the point about use cases, that's the one thing I think that we counsel customers on a regular basis is, great, you're going to empty out your data center. What's the order? And they come to us, well, you're going to tell us, right? I'm like, well, no, because there's
Only
three
you
things that
know.
go into it. Which apps are ready, are ready to be moved, or can be moved, right? Are technically able to be moved. What are the dependencies that app has? If it's a standalone app, easy. But if it's got 16 data sources it needs to connect to, that's probably not the first wave going to the cloud for you, right? So we walk through all that, and there's no magic bullet. It's the simple, pragmatic decision making we've always made, right? Use case, practicality, cost, operational efficiency, those types of things. The other thing I would point out to your point about resiliency, redundancy, and that type of stuff, cloud does not alleviate your responsibility to plan for that stuff. We learned a hard lesson, 3 summers ago with the AWS USA East outage,
Right.
Where everybody just thought automatically it would spin up somewhere else, right? And the problem is that if you didn't build, just in the same way if you didn't build a clustered Windows SQL server, it doesn't fail over, right? So I think the thing is that the opportunities to build redundancy and resiliency in the cloud era it's a lot easier. I don't want to say order of magnitude easier because there's a learning curve we're still in the middle of. But I think it's easier because the way we think about applications and data and the way that the cloud architectures, availability zones and redundancies that are already there, you just have to exploit them. You just have to use them.
Go ahead, Mary Jo.
I can give you a very concrete example of this whole maybe redundancy. Maybe people are getting it, right? So this week, a couple days ago, I was looking, as I occasionally do, at the Azure status page for fun.
As one does.
As one does. And all of a sudden I looked, and the entire U.S. East region was red flags. Every single service in U.S. East, right? So normally when that happens, my Twitter timeline lights up.
Yep.
And everyone's like, Mary Jo, Azure's down. What's going on? Can you call Microsoft? And so I started looking. I'm like, why is no one complaining? Like, I was looking for people to be complaining. And I saw a couple, but not many. And I found out, like, the reason was a lot of people, it seemed to have just failed over. Right?
Or we're paying to have the S3 replication.
Right.
They failed over their
Somewhere, right?
servers but forgot that the data's still in USA East.
Maybe. But it was amazing because just a year ago, if that same scenario had happened, I know the
Yep.
reaction would have been very different. And I was even pinging people proactively who I knew had workloads in US East, big ones, because that's one of Microsoft's biggest regions. And I said, why aren't you all over Twitter on this? And they said, nothing looks like it's wrong.
Wow.
Well, and the hard part is that those interconnected issues sometimes are not visible even to the folks that are building it. So,
Right.
So you end up.
Right.
We had an issue with an event, to go back to my cloud experience, where most of the country went down, and it turned out somebody cut one fiber cable. But it just happened to, the way it managed the relationship between two different databases, just shut the whole system down, for a couple hours,
Right.
while they figured out how, and literally figuring it out was getting another fiber, terminating the fiber and putting it back together so that then they could figure out the rerouting later and get it back working. But it was but they didn't know that dependency was there.
Right.
And that's why the redundancy is so important, is that they didn't even think that would be a problem. They thought that they could just, it didn't seem like they weren't protecting the cable because they didn't think it was that important.
That was the biggest lesson I think I took away from that outage that AWS had a couple summers ago. We talked to customers that are like, why am I down? I have nothing running in AWS. oh, wait a minute, the thing that does tax calculations
Yeah.
for my point of sale systems
It's running.
is sitting there. Or, oh, because one of my vendors was lazy, they're doing transit across AWS zones networking as opposed to doing real networking. Right.
I think
So-
even as consumers, when AWS went down, we didn't know everything that we use
Right.
from
Right.
Instagram to, Flickr is running on AWS, and that was an interesting lesson even for end users. I want to take a little break because we have a couple of commercials, but this is a great conversation. I want to put a pin in that part, talk about redundancy, and I also want to talk about, since we're talking about the future of the cloud, the future of bandwidth interdependency, hybrid cloud, stuff like that. We've got a great panel. Mary Jo Foley from Windows Weekly and allaboutmicrosoft.com. Alex Lindsay from MacBreak Weekly and Zero. Do you say 090 or
We just say
090?
090.
Yeah, everybody
I know.
yells at me when I say 090. It says,
Yeah,
no,
we
no, no,
get
that's a
upset.
zero,
Yeah,
Leo.
It is 090.
090.media. And Mike Dorosh from Gartner Group. There's no way to say that wrong. Thank you for being here. We're here at Worldwide Technology, which is an amazing. Did you guys get to go on the
Yep.
AT?
Yeah, it was
Mary Jo and I were
Fantastic
doing the
campus.
ATC
Yeah.
tour. They let us into the Network Operations Center
Unbelievable.
with the fans blowing. They said, "Don't touch anything." It's so cool what they've put together, and it really answers, I think, a question a lot of customers who are thinking about it will have about, well, how do I get this stuff to work together? How do I get these interdependencies to be handled? And that's what exactly the engineers at Worldwide Tech do in the ATC. They spin up pilots, proofs of concepts. They show how one piece of gear from a company like HPE will integrate with another piece of gear. And that is really valuable, both for them as, kind of setting these things up, but also a client can come to them saying, well, I'm thinking about, connecting to Equinix through, and how is that going to work? And they can demonstrate it. They can show it. $500 million worth of equipment in there. It's actually now, they have a big sign that says the ATC, but they told me, no, it's one of the 3 buildings. It's spread out. It's growing like crazy. Hundreds of OEMs, all the key partners, high-tech heavyweights like Hewlett-Packard Enterprise and Intel, little guys like Tanium and Equinix. It's just a fantastic place to try technology out. And here's the most amazing thing. You can use it too. And you can use it on the web right now at wwt.com/twit. The ATC is an incubator for IT innovation. You can schedule or do on-demand labs, things like HPE's InfoSite Lab, along with hundreds of other labs that'll show you, that demonstrate, they'll help you understand the newest advances in cloud-based machine learning, to provide global insights into the status and health of infrastructure in one location. You could see how this would be so useful in situations where something's down, but what's going on and how come it's not working? You can learn about products before you launch. And this lab as a service, which they launched this past summer, is a dedicated lab space within the ATC where you can do your own programmatic testing using all of this $500 million technology ecosystem that WWT's already built. And it's virtual. It means you don't have to come here to St. Louis, although, nice time of year to come here. It's getting a little springy. It's a little balmy. But you don't have to come here. You can go use the lab anywhere in the world 24/7 because it's all online. This is an amazing platform. I want you to go there. It's not just the hands-on labs. They have articles. They have case studies. They have all the tools you need, and you don't have to pay anything for it. What I really admire about WWT is that as they have learned in these labs about things, they've put this stuff online and made it available to anybody who could benefit from this. And that's a really huge contribution. It's an amazing company. We came out here last night, had a meetup at the Trainwreck Saloon. You were there, Alex. And people came up to me and said, WWT is a great corporate citizen in St. Louis. We love them. They just brought a MLS, Major League Soccer team to St. Louis. It's pretty cool. I'm really pleased to be here. If you want to know more about WWT, the ATC, if you want to become part of the growing community, go to wwt.com/twit. WWT, Worldwide Tech, simplifies the complex. wwt.com/twit, delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. We thank him so much for hosting us here for this conversation. I was thinking, Mary Jo, as we were talking about this, we went from ISDN, fractional T1 to T1 to fiber. The next step, the cloud might even be above the clouds with satellite. That's what I'm most interested in because that means I could be anywhere in the world, maybe, right? If I have a pizza box-sized antenna and I can get the cloud. That's going to change things dramatically.
It will, for sure. I mean, it's crazy being a journalist covering this, to watch how in 1 year things change.
I don't know how you keep up.
I don't, but I do my best.
You do a pretty good job.
No, just the number of services that launch on all these clouds, and how companies are evaluating, like when you're trying to evaluate, should I be using AWS or Azure, or should I use Google Cloud, and how do you evaluate that? Because a lot of them, it's almost a tit for tat these days. Like when one of them introduces a new networking service or a compute service or a storage service, the other ones try to get out there just as quickly.
But competition's great.
It's great.
Right?
It's great.
It's a very competitive
Right.
environment.
So, if anytime Amazon announces something new, you're like, okay, 1, 2, 3, where's Microsoft? There
Right.
they are, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
So are they similar? I mean, are they at a parity with one another, or is Microsoft better at one thing? I guess the Pentagon thinks they are.
Yeah, I guess. Or somebody in the government does.
Somebody thinks that.
When I think about how different ones have slightly different profiles, I always think there are certain identifiers that I associate with each of them. So in Amazon's case, I think, they have a very good startup story. A lot of the startup companies go with AWS.
It's been transformative. I think
has.
startups today compared with startups 10 years
Right.
ago, you kind of alluded to that too, Mike. It's a different experience
It is.
completely. You don't have to. I remember my friend Kevin Rose setting up a colo, and we're so excited. We're installing our software now, and you don't do all
I
of
know.
that.
You need laptops.
Yeah, that's all you need.
And an internet
a coffee
connection.
shop that
And-
has
yeah,
good
yeah.
coffee.
Right,
yeah.
coffee,
Right.
laptops, and internet connection, right? I mean,
Yeah, but like Google, like a lot of startups also go with Google Cloud, but Google seems to have more cred with a lot of people I talk to because of their open source roots. I mean, they were there.
It's
from the
developers
Pretty
for
much,
Google.
right?
Yeah.
And also AI.
right, AI and data, yeah.
TensorFlow is kind of eating the world,
Yep.
right? And machine learning.
But
So
you're right. As soon as they announced those TPUs, Microsoft said, we
We
could
should
do
do
that.
this too.
We
right?
could do that too.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Microsoft, I mean, like I said before, they have the enterprise brand, right? And so, as you said, a lot of people, it's by Microsoft. You can't go wrong because we know them.
Is this
Well,
is
but-
this just kind of branding, or is there really a genuine difference, Mike, between these guys?
I mean, in all honesty, I mean, we some of the purists that I work with at Gartner and the technical end of Gartner, will tell you there are differences between these clouds, and there are. I mean, they do the same things differently. Let's just be honest, right?
We did an event with Thousand Eyes, and it was really interesting to see because the interconnects are completely different.
exactly.
So you might, if you're going to China, that may not be the best. I won't say names, but one might not be the best choice, right?
Right, agreed. And I hesitate to say who's the best because again, it goes back to this idea: what do you want to do?
Right.
Right. And we've discovered a couple things. So Amazon, Microsoft, Google. To your point, right? Google's kind of the technologist's dream, but the reality is the IT ops guy finds a lot of things that they have to do that are harder to do on Google than they could do on Amazon or Microsoft's platforms, right? So we see a lot of people using Google for solutions, and I think that's actually one of Google's strengths.
Because
right?
of compute. Is it really about compute?
It's about compute to a certain degree, but it's about the AI and TensorFlow and machine learning stuff. It's about the Hadoop cluster that a data scientist who does nothing about.
Kubernetes.
Kubernetes.
Someone has to say
right.
it. I will.
Right. Right. But
Well, Mike said Hadoop for you, so
Okay,
you-
that's
it's
good.
fair
Right.
enough.
my point being is that Google's a company that if you look at what they're really known for, they're known for packaging up these very complex technologies, ad tech, search tech, YouTube, right? The media stuff they're doing. I read somewhere recently that if with all the bandwidth they sit on, they'd be the 8th largest telco in the world.
Wow.
Right? If you think
Wow.
about it, right? And you think
Yeah.
about all the nodes they have
Yeah.
for ad tech, search tech, all that stuff. They were distributed networking like Akamai,
Yeah.
right? They were edge before that word really was, right? Akamai invented edge 20 years ago with CDN or by packaging CDN. But I mean, you think about it, right? So I don't think there's a lot of people that look at Google as a data center replacer. They look at Google for very specific things, right? And I think Anthos and the Kubernetes stuff and some of the low-level things they're doing and some of the open stuff they're doing is going to drive the industry. They'll be the parts supplier for the rest of the industry, right? Microsoft and AWS have taken a different approach, and that is let's go after IT, right? And let's go after the ops guys, and let's go after the apps guys, right? And I think one of the things that we've noticed in the last couple of years, talking to clients and service providers of clients, that there was a time when the messaging around developer and build and all that, we build things, right, worked. And I think that was a really good set of messaging that everybody used, right? But in 2020, most IT people I know don't develop. They write scripts and they integrate and they operate, right? They don't write code traditionally, and they don't develop apps or processes, right? They do different things. So I think the differences between the clouds are really about what your use cases are and what you want to do.
And I think the danger there is that the construct sometimes starts to constrain creativity.
Right.
So I can do this thing with this cup, and so I just do a lot of things with that cup, whereas a different shape might do something more powerful.
Right.
And I think that a lot of times we've had issues where we've built stuff into the cloud, and we get, we have a product out, it's working, and the issue is now we can't do this one thing that we didn't think of before that process, and it's limited at, when we were doing it in the old way, we would reprogram it, or if we had programmed it from scratch. But so when we start just clumping together pre-made things, I think the challenge that I've had, or in the past, is clumping together a piece in the middle of this giant thing.
Right.
I don't know how it works on the inside. It's just a black box, and it's no longer executing what I needed to execute.
The complexity of these environments, right? And that's the thing that I think everybody misses is, when you build these things in your data center, you buy technologies that you more or less hope work together.
Yeah.
That's a bad plan.
But I mean, it's the reality, right? I mean, no matter how much assurance you get, right? You're rolling.
Insert plug for the ATC here, by the way.
Exactly, right? And then that's why the ATC and labs are very important, right? And in the post data center era, where do you run your lab now? Right. So something like an ATC, an aggregation point, right, is going to be critical because these pieces, right, you gotta test. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a difference between somebody building their next gigantic, world-changing customer experience and somebody looking to run 1,000 instances of something from their data center, right? And there's different disciplines that are needed there. And the funny thing is, in the last year or two, we've noticed clients come to us and say, well, if all things are equal, which ones you pick? I said, just pick one, because probably within a year or two, you're going to be doing business with at least one of the other two.
Is that the solution, a hybrid cloud?
I believe it is. I think the reality is...
There are challenges, too, there, though.
Absolutely, there are challenges there, but I think there's a very interesting thing we overlook in this space. 5 years ago, I would have said it was a nightmare, because there was all these different technologies, some of it old, some of it new, and there wasn't one player or two players that you could look at to rally around. But we got to give some credit to VMware. And what I mean by that is VMware has conservatively 80% of the hypervisor market, right, which is huge. So we can almost argue that 80% of the hybrid cloud market is the compute part of hybrid cloud, and the management part of hybrid cloud is being driven by VMware technology in a lot of ways, right? I'd have to go back and look at the market numbers, but the reality is it's a planning assumption. And one of the interesting things we've been hearing is one of the biggest inhibitors to rapid cloud adoption is nobody has skills, right? Nobody has cloud skills. You can't buy them, you can't hire them, you can only train them and develop them. And if you think that...
Is that because it's so new?
Yeah, and I think there is... we've created a lot of specialization in IT. I'm a VMware hypervisor guy versus I'm an compute IT guy, right? And I think that's the thing. I think we're now going back to I don't want to use the word generalist model, but we're going back to a generalist model.
But being hybrid almost it means interdisciplinary.
Interdisciplinary, right? And the silos have to begin to go away. You don't have a storage team, you have a hybrid operations team, right?
Speaking to the future of the cloud, which we're supposedly talking about, although we really got a good roadmap of where we stand today, Microsoft's all in on containerization. Is that kind of the next step from hypervisor and VM is to go to something more lightweight?
So I have a very good friend of mine at one of these companies that pointed out a container is a portable VM.
It is.
Right?
But it's lighter weight.
It's lighter weight,
and
right?
You're seeing a lot of diversity in the container world.
Absolutely. And there has to be some level of standardization, consolidation that'll come. And I think the one thing the Kubernetes era is doing is forcing a little bit of that. Right? Not enough, but a little bit of that. But the reality is containerization is both a abstraction that allows you to be multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, right?
It kind of commoditizes the cloud,
it
doesn't
does. It does to a certain degree, except for the reality is that we still can't quite yet pick up a workload from one and plug it into the other without hitting it with a hammer a couple times, right? At least, if not rewriting the underpinnings, right? But what that portability does is it does things like makes things like service level agreements around server availability irrelevant.
How so?
Well, if I can instantiate a container and it fails and I can instantiate it again in 30 seconds
Right.
and there was no interruption,
As long as it's not 3 a.m.
right, well, there's no interruption,
Right.
right?
Right.
Did I meet or not meet the
Right.
SLA, right?
Right.
And in a world where things are designed, being purposely architected to fail and recover,
Right.
what does server availability mean?
Right.
Right? So, I think there's a...
That's a really good thing too.
Right.
That's a really good thing.
Yeah, I think what hybrid is doing is forcing us to take a good hard look at what we keep from the old model, right? Both in ways we explain cloud, but also the things that are still going to be important to tie all this together, right? Yeah. And the skills thing, because nobody has them, but then there's not one tool to rule them all, right? Proverbially anymore. There's you have AWS tools, you have Azure tools, you have Google tools, you have VMware tools, and so opportunities for companies like VMware to become that, at least the basis of a tool stack for hybrid cloud, makes it easier for customers to adopt.
Is there almost an importance for, as we look at developing talent, is there almost a demand for a liberal arts of computing? Where you're learning a little bit of everything. You're not a VM specialist. You are I understand how computing works or how networking works overall within any of these platforms, and then I'm going to just kind of specialize.
I think there's more of a generalist approach we have to have.
But it also sounds like it's going to lead to stratification of skills. So you're going to have the generalist, and then you're going to have the Kubernetes person. You're going to have the big data person. You're going to have different skill sets.
Yeah, I think you are, but I think on an I think there's two pieces of it. There's kind of day-to-day operations where people are going to have to be more generalist. You're going to have smaller teams. The DevOps model is actually beginning to trickle into infrastructure and operations, right? You're going to have smaller teams that are trained in multiple disciplines, and then you're going to have a wrapper, not as deep as we used to in the siloed data center days of storage specialists, database specialists, Kubernetes specialists, security specialists, that when your ops team hits 30 minutes in hasn't resolved the problem, you're bringing in, the next layer.
One of the things that's driving this, Mary Jo, is we're doing things in the cloud we couldn't do on-prem. Things like big data, when you have giant data sets, and the things we're learning from those giant data sets are, I think, really changing what we can do, which is then driving adoption.
For sure. I mean, that's why you see all the emphasis now on AI and IoT,
Yeah.
right? Because it's all really about the data. Cloud is really a data play, right? It's about storing your data, manipulating your data, presenting your data. And so if we didn't have the cloud, none of those disciplines really would be anywhere near what they are right now.
It'd all be siloed.
It would.
Yeah.
Or not even capable
wouldn't even have
at
it.
all.
Yeah.
Right.
There's no hard drive big enough.
Right. How do you do machine learning without the cloud?
Right. Right.
I mean, you can.
Let's talk about ML and AI, because that keeps coming up when we have these cloud discussions. Why is it that we need the cloud? What is it because of these giant data sets? Is that what's
I'd
really
say
driving
largely
that?
because
Yeah.
of these giant data sets.
Yeah.
I mean, look at IoT, right? What are you doing with IoT? You're taking all this sensor input and storing it somewhere, and then hopefully at some point making sense of it.
And those sensors are distributed
Right.
globally.
Right. Edge, the intelligent cloud, intelligent edge. Someone said that.
I
we
think
know.
Satya Nadella.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the reality is I think that we're seeing all of this stuff, right? There's this weirdness with machine learning and AI, right? Because it's now beginning to drive labor out of IT, right? And what I mean by that is not costing people jobs, right? Because you still need somebody to put fingers on a keyboard. The machines aren't that good yet and won't be for a long time. But what they're doing is allowing us to get more out of the labor we have, which is really important when there's not enough labor and skills, right? But to your point about vocational, about a generalist approach, honestly, I get this question 5 times a day. Hey, do you know anybody? Do you know any data scientists with 5 years of experience and 3 years of cloud experience? I said, no, but I got a unicorn egg. If you plant it, maybe in 2 years you'll have a data scientist with that skill. They just don't exist. And if they do exist, you're going to pay much money, and the minute they work for you, the clock starts ticking on their next offer. Right? So I think we're going to have to think about where we get talent from. And, one of the interesting untapped resources is all of those people that go to graduate school that get degrees and that have a degree that requires some level of statistics. Because every single one of them now is doing all of their statistical research, not on the bad server that's been there for 20 years in the university data center, but on AWS or on Azure or on Google, right? So I've been kind of preaching this to some of the smaller service providers in places that have university towns, it's like, no, don't go after the computer engineering and computer science guys. I mean, they've already got job offers as a sophomore, right? Go after the sociology master's or PhD that realizes he can make more money, has to pay off his student loans, right? Go after them because we can teach you the rest of this, but I can't teach you the math and the science that you need, right? Yeah. I can teach you how to provision a database in AWS. Can't teach you how to do the analysis or write the analysis. You got to come with some sort of skills. So I think there's a lot of I think we underestimate what's coming out of the universities. We look for degrees versus things inside of those degrees. But I think that there's, machine learning and AI is getting to the point now where service providers are now beginning to talk about efficiencies that they're getting from it, right? So instead of just talking about how much something costs, a CIO wants to know, if I buy this from you, tell me what the efficiencies are. So in my mind, we're now going to go back to the old outsourcing numbers, right? If you do this, we take 0.2 of an FTE off of every system administrator you have. So I've got 10 people, that's 2 bodies I get back, right? I don't actually get the bodies, but I get labor to go do something else. Or I get cost efficiencies where I can go hire somebody else. And I think that's going to be a very interesting thing as we infuse more AI and machine learning into the industry.
Aren't there businesses today that wouldn't exist without the cloud? Is it creating new categories of business? Alex, you do a lot of work for Salesforce. They live in the cloud, right?
I think that there's my business wouldn't exist without it.
Social media would be a lot harder.
I guess it wouldn't be any podcasting without the cloud.
Yeah, all of those things are there, and I think that it is. I find it interesting how it used to be we would think about putting stuff on the cloud after we really structured it. Like we'd play with it on a local server, and then we'd think about, okay, I got that figured out. Now I'm going to figure out how to replicate it into the cloud. Now we've kind of gone another direction where I find myself experimenting in the cloud because it's cheaper. So like for instance, I do these really heavy process intensive calculations for photogrammetry. We were talking about that earlier, but I can fill up any computer, any local computer, at 100% for a couple days on one project. Just I throw 190 photos in. I want a 3D model back. Go to work, and it just crushes the computer. My home iMac will literally just crash after 3 days. And I was told that you can't run a processor at maximum capacity for 3 days and expect it to stay on. And so what the easiest way to do that is to pay for $75. I can pay $20,000 to build a workstation, or $50,000 to build a Mac workstation, or whatever, and I can spend $20,000 to see if this is a good idea, or I can spend $75 a day renting it out of the cloud. I can upload all my stuff and let it work for a week. Now I've dropped $300 or $400.
You see companies like
and I know whether it works.
I can make a minimal viable product in 5 minutes for $5, and I can show it to clients.
Right.
Well, it's amazing. The web hosting business, right, which was what cloud was before cloud, right, is now almost entirely on AWS and Azure. There are still some people that have dedicated server hosting and stuff like that, but you look at all the big players.
Yeah.
Why would you? Why
would you?
You do it because that's what you've always done.
There's another business that is being transformed by the cloud, and that's gaming.
Yes.
It's very interesting to see this. And sometimes I wonder, do you think Microsoft's doing xCloud, which is their streaming gaming service like Google Stadia or Sony's PlayStation, you think they're doing it to show off Azure? Do you think it's a new business for them? Why is Microsoft doing that?
I think a little of both, right? So
I know you love gaming so
I
much.
love
It's your
gaming.
favorite thing.
It is. I game
We're being
all day, all night.
sarcastic
But
here. She falls asleep during the podcast when it's the
whenever we have the
Xbox,
segment, I'm
Xbox
like,
time.
Xbox. No, but I actually am intrigued by xCloud because
It's Azure.
It's Azure underneath, and it's a really good proof point of what Microsoft can do in streaming. In fact, a lot of the technology they're using for xCloud came from work they did in the early days for virtual desktop.
Yep.
So that was kind of like when they were experimenting around, could we stream games worldwide on any device? They're like, hey, you know what? We get some technology for that. It's called virtual desktop. Well, let's see what we can do
Do you
with
think
that.
that'll happen with Windows? That people won't just not put it on a hard drive anymore?
Yeah, maybe
Why
one
not?
day, right? Right, I know. More and more things get connected to the cloud. All the edge devices, including Windows PCs, which now count as edge. In fact, Satya Nadella said recently, maybe we should rename Windows Edge something.
I do think when we start putting all of our data in the cloud, we start seeing some of the legal ramifications as well, because now the federal government has more places to subpoena than just you. I mean,
Well, that's a very good point.
But what cloud has done is actually made it a little bit harder, because now I don't go on hunting expeditions and say, I know they're on one of these servers.
Right.
I want a subpoena for the servers in these 3 racks, right? And we're going to do discovery based on, oh, and by the way, if you're not under investigation, you're screwed because I've got your data for the next 6 months, right? And there were some very famous incidents going back a decade about some heavy-handed approaches there. Now the problem is AWS looks at you and goes, good, fine, go look. See if you can tell me where it is, because I think we know, but you didn't write the subpoena the right way. So I think there is something to be said about the legalities of data and all that. I think the problem is we've got, I'm not anti-government, I'm not trying to make it, but we've got uninformed people writing rules and laws that are more about protectionism than they are about
But are you
protecting
surprised?
data.
I mean, even people who work in the field are
Oh, yeah.
struggling
Yeah,
with what, I mean, it's
I
changing so fast.
Right, and the reality is you know, I have a lot of friends, and we all know people that, you know, I won't do anything online, blah, 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 blah. They don't know too much about me. Yeah, do you go to a grocery store and use a loyalty card? Guess what?
Well, you go to a grocery store and use your credit card.
Right. Do you have a cell phone?
pretty
you
soon-
don't, they don't need the loyalty
Pretty
card.
soon
They
you
just
go to
need-
the Amazon Go
right,
store,
credit card, right.
you don't need to use anything.
Right.
They have cameras. They'll do it all for you.
But the reality is I think that our psychological view of data and privacy is much more severe than the actual experience in reality, right? I think we expect our personal data to be inviolate, right? You know, locked behind force fields and all these things. And the reality is, you know, every one of us is guilty of having a Post-it note with a password somewhere in our house, right? So, I mean, you know, I argue, we have this conversation daily with clients. Cloud's not secure. Nope. Got the same challenges you had in your data center.
Well, people ask me, like, is this secure? And I'm like, it's relatively secure, but it's not secure. It's like the word secure is not really the right word. It is more secure.
We've
or
managed,
very secure.
we've managed all the risks that we know of.
Right. Or within reason.
Within reason.
I can tell you, I can tell you, I have a friend who's a red team.
Yep.
And he works for large companies, hacking into their for work. And I said, do you ever get stopped? And he goes, no. And I said, ever? And he goes, never. I never get stopped. He goes, it's just a matter of how long it took to get in, and then I tell them what happened. But and he said
Eventually you're going to get in.
and it's almost all social engineering. So that's the other thing is that as we start moving this stuff into the cloud, like one of the things that we really move towards is we build hashes for all of our passwords.
Right.
We have, we
took the
stop
steps.
writing your own passwords. Like that was the big thing was don't, put it into a company that's going to manage security, and that's going to be. Is it totally secure? Maybe not, but is it more secure than you writing something on a password or can't remember the last one or your dog's name? That like your dog's name,
Right.
can be socially engineered out of you. But out of your
Or if
family.
you're Paris Hilton, just check her Instagram post.
But the point is that
Right.
someone can research you. They
Yeah.
can talk to people. They can figure out what those all of those questions are.
So, actually, it was just a few days ago. It was the 30th anniversary of the raid on Steve Jackson Games.
Yep. I was just
I
gonna
think
bring
that's
that
what
up.
you were thinking about.
Yep.
And that was what started the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The Secret Service went to the premises, took the servers, took everything. Are you better off in the cloud than that? I mean...
Well, I mean, it's because your workloads are spread, unless you're on a private
Right.
node, which some customers do, and there's reasons to do those things, your stuff's round robin.
And is
right?
Microsoft, Google, and Amazon better able to fight those kinds of subpoenas? Or?
Well, unless you're going to subpoena a data center,
Right.
which no judge is going to write
Right.
It's
Too
not
big.
Microsoft's criminal activity.
Yep.
It's right, so I think there is something to it, and it goes back to, one of the reasons in general we believe the cloud is as secure, if not slightly better, is one, the level of anonymity you have, right? There's not a name on the server that says, Joe's servers, right? Or your company's servers, right? Like in some data centers. And it's only been in the last 5 years you walk through data centers and, in hosting centers where people the names aren't on the cages anymore, right? But, the reality is that Steve Jackson's Gain thing was an overreach. I mean, it really was.
Absolutely.
They went in and seized every server.
They took
in
the
that.
laser printers.
Right, took everything, right?
What data's on them? I don't know.
But what I think we're seeing is a couple of things. One of which is because these hyperscale providers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, throw in IBM, Oracle, everybody else that's in this business takes their infrastructure security as serious as they possibly can.
Yeah.
They've invested in the automation and the smarts and the other things to a level that no IT department is ever going to be able to do,
Yeah.
right? To your point, they've thought of the 5 things that nobody else has.
They're under constant attack.
Right.
They're constant. For
They
everyone.
themselves are.
Right.
So Microsoft and Amazon and Google know how to defend because they're defending themselves.
The anonymity factor of the scale,
Yeah.
right, is such. So we equate this to this. I live in the city of Chicago, right? And, you live in a city, there's crime. Right, I know it doesn't happen in St. Louis, but in Chicago we're a big city, right? So I equate this to customers. It's like, look, most of the incidents we've seen in the cloud we've not heard of one that has really been Amazon, Microsoft, or Google's problem, right? It's been stupid human tricks. Somebody did something dumb in IT or forgot to change a password, or it was 5 o'clock and we set up the admin account and didn't change the default and we got owned, right? Stupid application tricks, meaning we didn't really understand that this traffic was passed in the clear when we put it in the cloud. So, right. Well, but again, to your point, when it's in my data center,
Right.
when it's not in my data center, different level of rigor I got to have, right? So I think that there's that part of it, right? So I equate this to this: cat burglar going down the house, goes to the first back door, jiggles it, the dog barks. He moves on to the second house, the light goes on. He moves on to the third house, nobody's home. He kicks the door in. Right? You can protect it, you can provide some level of there, but if you live in a big city, sooner or later your car or your house is broken into, right? That's different risk management than if somebody wants to attack you and hack you, to your point, they're going to kick in the front door.
Yeah.
Right? They're not going to care.
Very big difference between targeted
Right.
and phishing.
Right. And we believe that if a criminal or state actor wants to kick in the front door of your data center
can
and get
get you.
after your stuff,
They
ain't a
can
damn
get
thing you can do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, they'll get
right?
you.
But the cat burglar,
Right.
a lot of things you can do.
Right.
Right.
And there's a lot more cat burglars
Right.
than there are feds.
Right.
So far.
Well, depends.
We're going to take a little break. We're almost an hour in. If you guys have questions, if you put them on the cards, I hope you do, pass them down towards the aisles here, and we'll collect them so we can give you a chance to get your questions answered. I really appreciate this panel. It's really fantastic to have Mike Dorosh from Gartner and Alex Lindsay from 090 and Mary Jo Foley, our partner in crime from Windows Weekly. And of course, we thank so much our sponsors here today, Worldwide Technology. You're on the facilities. The people who are here in the studio audience know what a beautiful building this is. They built their world headquarters and outgrew it in 5 years, so they had to build another one. What's good though is that old world headquarters now is home to the Advanced Technology Center. They've made good use of it over the last 10 years. They've built just an amazing facility. For people like me who don't really understand what does Worldwide Tech do, they are one of the top technology solution providers in the world. They deliver business and technology outcomes to both large private and public organizations around the globe. They do a lot of work with the government. They're in the business of digital transformation. And really, if you're in business, that's the business you're in these days, is digital transformation. They support organizations in the process by helping them adapt, for instance, a multi-cloud architecture. They stay with you every step of the way. Frankly, their businesses, there's so many businesses now who use WWT, who have WWT people on premises with them. I was looking at these facilities they have to build the infrastructure that they ship out. Instead of just sending you the parts and saying, you put it together, they integrate it all together. They've developed a new form of, they have carpenters on their team that build these crates. You got to see this, Alex. They build these crates that are specifically designed to house assembled racks, which they then ship. It's really amazing what WWT has done. Their consultants will sit down with customers. As you were talking about, Mike, they'll start at the high level, formulate a vision and a strategy, think about it from that level, because they know that these cloud investments only pay off when they're aligned to your business goals. It starts, the tech is the bottom layer, but the top layer is the most important layer. What are you trying to do? They do briefings, they do workshops, they help some of the world's largest organizations unravel the complexities of the cloud, unlocking business opportunities, because ultimately that's what it's all about. If you're doing cloud migration, they have an amazing team doing incredible app development. Panera, which is a local St. Louis, I didn't know that started here in St. Louis. Beautiful app that WWT did for them. They can create a secure landing zone in any cloud. They have DevOps to help you get those tricky things done with on-demand labs at the ATC. They can give you access to tools for things like microservices, cloud-native development. Once you're up in the cloud, WWT helps you with managing it and optimizing it. They know it's not an endpoint. The cloud is a continuum and needs continuous monitoring, attention to detail. They're here to help you with that. It's not out the door, bye-bye, see ya. They are your partner. Whether your strategy calls for cloud native, hybrid cloud, or on-prem resources, yes, they do on-prem too, with all this talk of the cloud, WWT works closely with Intel to optimize the latest cloud smart solutions based on Intel technology for security, performance, agility. As an example, they feature Intel Optane DC persistent memory and other great Intel technologies, workload optimized to deliver affordable large capacity and data persistence. You want to know more? Find out why organizations turn to WWT and stay with them year after year. Find out more at wwt.com/twit. You've got a partner in the cloud. And if you create that My WWT account, you can access all those amazing resources that the Advanced Technology Center has to offer. wwt.com/twit. Worldwide technology delivering business and technology outcomes around the world. Did anybody have any questions, Laura? Oh, here's another one. Good. We have is there, before we get to the questions, is there anything we left out that you guys want to talk about? Anything people should be considering if they're making this move into the cloud?
I think the biggest thing we've learned after 5+ years of what I'll call mainstream cloud adoption is don't try to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I talk to clients every day that spend their entire migration budget trying to get the first 2 or 3 apps to the cloud by themselves, right? And like anything else, right? We recently did some renovations in our house, and I built a new office and all this stuff, and I'm not handy.
You didn't chop down the trees yourself.
No, I didn't chop down the trees myself. But I know this: if I need a plumber, I call a plumber, right? So if you're migrating or going to the cloud or working in the cloud, go find a service provider or a consultancy, somebody to at least give you some advice. Doesn't mean you can't do it yourself, but be informed.
And I would say for me, it's having a long-term strategy.
Yep.
Knowing where you want to go. You may not get there, and you don't need to build all of it at one time, but when you have that discussion with specialists, say, oh, by the way, I am going to eventually want to have a gym down here, and I eventually want to, as I build it, we may not use that right now, but I need you to know about it, because if you start building all that infrastructure, into it, it becomes hard. The more concrete you lay, the harder it's going to be.
Well,
to
just
change.
don't start thinking about don't stop thinking about your business. That's what this is all about. Well, it's not about the
other
technology.
thing too is it's not just having a strategy. It's constantly reevaluating that strategy based on what you've learned,
and
because
what you're trying
it's
to
not
do.
like you can plan for 5 years here.
And it's not. It's not you plan for 5 years that's what you're going to do.
Right.
It's just that you want to have an idea.
Right. You have an idea what the goal is.
What has bitten us has been just doing today's project and not thinking about where we want to be in 5 years. It didn't mean that we were going to do a lot more. It just means we might put one little piece in, or be ready for something, or choose a certain platform, because we know that that's the direction that we may go. And now we're going to change that direction all the time, but a lot of times that trajectory stays in a certain.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things, just kind of wrap that idea up, is in design thinking, one of the methodologies is what's your outcome. Right?
Yeah.
And instead of having, the word strategy, right? So we use the word outcome, right? Because that's really just code for strategy that actually has practicality, right? And I think that's the thing, when you're thinking about a move to the cloud for anything, right? Whether it's your entire data center or the next killer app you're building, right? What is the outcome you're looking for? And once that outcome is being achieved, what's your next outcome, right? So they're projects, but there's some things in every outcome that become foundational. Okay, we built a data platform. Now I can build 5 other apps, and there's 5 other outcomes. And I think that's one of the things we need to start thinking about. This is, it's not, I need 4 nines and RPOs of this and network availability of that. Is I need to drive 3,000 more transactions through my customer experience app that I just built, right? So what are all the things I need to do that?
I'd say if you're starting out in the cloud or even already in the cloud, you should assume multi-cloud is the norm and not an aberration. And that sounds kind of basic, but you see all these announcements from these big vendors all the time saying, oh, Adobe went Azure or somebody went Google. You know what? One part of their business went there, not the whole thing, in spite of the press releases.
So is it a mistake for in Jedi, the case of the
That's a
Pentagon
weird
Cloud,
one, right? Winner
to say,
take
well,
all.
we're going to winner take all?
I mean, winner take all means, in this case, that they can subcontract to
Yeah.
people, right? And so it's not Microsoft is going to do every single part of that contract by
Right.
themselves.
Right.
But
I don't think Microsoft's going across the street to Google and saying, hey, can you help us out?
Probably
Can you,
not.
Can you lend a hand?
Probably not. Yeah, but smaller vendors and specialty vendors, people who have skill sets they don't have, they probably will do that, hopefully.
Right.
It's not going to be the cloud provider that's
Right.
going to be parsed out. It's going to be all the SIs and application
Exactly.
providers and
They're-
vendors and stuff
They're the
like
Uber
that.
contractor in that case.
But to your point, right? Multi-cloud. So we've seen this
Yeah.
over and over again. We're all in with AWS. Oh, except for that bit marketing bot in
Right.
Google. Oh, wait a minute. Now I got to run a data set out there. Oh, wait a minute. We're using Office 365, and now we have to run a compliance module out in Azure to make sure.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, wait a minute. Why don't we just start thinking about this like we thought about the stuff in our data center? There was some stuff that ran on a big Unix box.
Right,
There
right,
was some stuff
right.
that ran on Windows, and there was some stuff that ran on Linux. And there was stuff we virtualized because it was able to get the density, and there was stuff that we ran on.
And yet Microsoft sells itself like the one-stop shop, right?
Yeah, they all do.
They all
I
do.
guess they all do. They like to be.
Yeah.
But
Good
so
business
you as a
model.
customer, you shouldn't.
Microsoft's definitely done a better job, though, about at least a level of plausible agnosticity towards hybrid, right?
Lately,
Yeah,
they have.
yeah. I mean,
That's the new
much,
thing for
That's
Microsoft,
the new thing,
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
The old thing was it works better together if you're all in on
Right.
Microsoft, right?
But I think that they've realized that their clients were because
Not
they were
buying
catching
that.
up. Well, they were literally. If you started with AWS, you were using Azure. If you started with Azure, you would end
Right.
up with AWS at
Yeah.
some point too, right?
Right.
So I think what we're seeing there though is I think there's just an acknowledgement that no matter what everybody promises you about being all in, IT guys and gals
Yeah.
and the folks that are making the decisions hedge their bets. There's also this thought about risk management, corporate risk
Exactly.
management, right?
Yeah.
And as we're seeing right now in this period we're in. I've had a couple conversations with CEOs that are really, really nervous about the fact that their two big cloud providers are based in Seattle.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
And I
why you
say to
need
them, well,
multiple
they're not
regions.
all in Seattle,
Yeah,
right? I
exactly.
mean, right? And all the data centers aren't in Seattle. And oh, by the way, while there's a lot of people that work in those data centers, a lot of the teams that are building and engineering and operating them aren't necessarily sitting in the data center,
Well,
right?
it's sort of the whole point of this is that you are not in one place.
Right, exactly.
Your provider isn't, and you aren't, right?
But
Right.
but the idea being that I think there is this idea around corporate risk management, and it's not so much the outage or whatever. We've always dealt with that. But if something changes that I can no longer do business with you because your parent company got into my business or the government says I can't, right? I have to have a plan.
Right.
And that doesn't mean starting from zero with another provider because I'm basically screwed.
Good point.
Right?
Yep. So great questions from the audience. I'll start with this one. From an industry or vertical standpoint, is there one exemplar that has done cloud the best? Somebody who you could look at and say, these guys did it right. There's nobody without arrows in their back. Nobody.
I mean, look, it depends on what we're talking about. I can think about, some of the retail companies, right, that have created whole markets by creating the killer app on a mobile device, right? But the rest of their IT is a disaster,
Yeah.
right? I can think about, some of the born on the cloud companies that should be doing cloud right, but when you really, when you're 2 o'clock in the morning poking around and the developer consoles now pops up in their app, there's a problem, right? So I would argue it's not doing cloud right, it's doing technology right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's hard.
Is there somebody that people point to and say, boy, they really do that right? Is there not just cloud, but just technology? No, we're all struggling.
We're in a
Yeah.
weird in between paradigms phase where
How about
what is
Amazon? Wouldn't they be the best at this?
I don't know. The fact it took them so long to do Outposts which is their hybrid cloud strategy. You know, for years I would talk to Amazon and say, "What about hybrid cloud?" And they're like, "No one's doing that."
Oh, they were allergic
Like,
to
it's
that
fake.
word.
That's a fake cloud.
We own
right?
the cloud. Why would we want to work with anyone else?
Right, and just the idea that people might want to have their data in a data center in their own region, like a not up in the public cloud. They had to keep denying that and denying that. Finally, all right, we're doing it. So
Yeah.
I think they're not perfect.
Nobody. Yeah.
No, I mean, case in point, Amazon does a lot of things really well, and then it had to sign a partnership with VMware,
Right.
Interesting.
right? Because they couldn't, they had zero credibility outside of the four walls of an AWS data center,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, I think to the point, I just think we're in a period of time where better is probably the word, but best is
Right.
still is a long way from being decided. Let me put it this way: my data center's not on fire. I'm happy.
You have low standards.
And all of them are very good at the
Yeah,
moment.
they're
Like
all-
when we're talking about it, we're really shaving. I mean,
Yeah.
the
Right.
leaders
But it's
are,
just,
are
but
very
also
powerful.
just an industry, like or a vertical that really seems to
Well,
have gone into the cloud. And
I
done
will
it.
say,
Retail,
we have to
yeah.
remember that
Retail
like,
is
a majority of the data that's moving around is video. That's moving around the internet.
Is that true?
That's
Really?
worked out pretty well.
Thanks
I think
to
it's like
YouTube.
60
Well, media and entertainment, right?
But I think video itself
And Netflix?
is like 60% of
of
the,
the
of the
traffic,
internet
yeah.
traffic.
Yeah.
So that's turned out pretty well.
Netflix doing the cloud well.
Well, just look in the last year, though, all the streaming services that have launched. I'm now to the point where if anybody wants to form a startup to control all my streaming services so I can go to one place as opposed to having 17 apps
know.
and having devices that don't have that app because I forgot to download it, please call me. I'll be more than happy to angel fund you.
Well, but a good example of the cloud, kind of thwarting, something, or where you don't have as much control as you think. So you look at Game of Thrones, beyond the bad writing at the end.
Let's not look at season 8.
Wait a minute. I'm only in season 4. What do you mean there's bad writing at the end?
You can give up now. You can give up
All right,
now.
give up now, all right.
Yeah, anyway, so the if you look at what happened, so one of the things that was interesting is that the way that live streaming gets moved around is that we write all these bits and then we write a manifest. And the manifest says, I got a 1080p, I got a 720p, I got a, and the player's like, well, what do I need? And then he's like, just take one of these, And so the manifest tells the player what you're allowed to have, right? Well, unbeknownst to most of even us, I mean, the cable operators can manipulate the manifest as it's coming through.
Right.
So you don't know, so HBO can start off with a beautiful image, and Comcast can say, I don't really want to pass that 17 meg 1080p through.
So I'm gonna throttle
So I just it's not really throttling, it's just literally taking it out of the list. It's taking it out of the menu.
Comcast as
So
a
the-
cable provider or as an ISP?
As an ISP.
As an ISP.
As an ISP.
ISP.
So I'm using my Roku to watch HBO, but I'm doing it through Comcast. They're changing what I can see.
They're taking away something out of the menu. It's available, and if you
that
had a direct
explains-
link, you could pull it. But even when my wife is looking at it, going, "Why is this all
So
like
dark.
blocks
Right.
in
So
dark?" Well, the
dark.
dark was a creative or not a great creative
But I don't
decision.
think the
but
director thought it was going to get crunched as
Well,
much as it ended up being crunched.
the problem really there is not knowing the medium. That anybody that encodes video will tell you that blacks get annihilated.
Yeah.
Just the way that it's designed to protect the whites and throw away the blacks. Just you have to throw
So you
away
just
something.
don't do a long night.
That's how you do it long
Right,
night. And you're
right.
doing all the wrong things. But the point is that the lesson there is really that there are all of these stakeholders in your content that's moving around.
You don't control it.
isn't- You don't control it, but it's good to know it. So like when I go into an event,
But this is historically the problem with the cable, just the internet service providers, is they are a toll road to
Right.
what beautiful thing you're doing. They're still the last mile.
But like on a large event, I will know every place that my bits are going, and I will have a point of contact of who I can call. Like someone's
Right.
going to get yelled at if I'm not getting what I need, and that's like our
How
call
about
list.
Apple? Is Apple an exemplar?
They've had their own issues. They've had iCloud has not ever been.
No, iCloud's a terrible wreck.
I love and hate iTunes.
Although I will say
or whatever they're calling it this week. Apple Music, Apple Music, yeah.
But I will say that in the integration of devices as a heavy Apple user, I will say that it's amazing that I can the little things of I can copy something on my Mac and paste it on my phone, and I never think about that data. Like
Right.
what I will say Apple's gotten right so far is that all of my devices have all that data. They're all in there.
And what you don't have to think about is a lot of that data is going to the cloud and coming back down, right?
Oh, it absolutely
Yeah.
is, and it's doing it really quickly.
It looks like it's local.
It looks like it's local, but it's not. But what's fascinating about it is just they've mastered, I think, more than anyone else, the fluidity
Right.
of that, where it's completely invisible to you, and you're just moving that data around without thinking about it as a user, and you feel kind of secure about it.
Isn't that just because of the walled garden?
It is, but
But that's it.
But the
right?
walled gardens are funny because it's interesting. We have the technology to do all this stuff now, right? We have the technology to provide 4K broadcasts across the web, right? Except if you live in this little part of Northern California where there's a cable provider that doesn't want 4K to deliver, right? Or I'm going to Canada next week for some business, hopefully, if we're still traveling, right? And if I cross the border and try to connect to Netflix on my ID in the US, I get a different menu. Right? So we can fix the technology parts of this, but the reason I'm hesitant to call out media and entertainment as doing cloud well is they haven't fixed the underlying problem, like
Copyright.
why I can't watch the Cubs game when I'm in the yard on my phone on the MLB app, even though I live in Chicago.
Here's a great similar question. I would move on because we got so many.
Yeah.
Is there room for a disruptor to emerge that could unseat the incumbents, the big three?
Let me say, absolutely, there always is. Now, will it happen?
Don't you think there's so much scale that
I-
those three have that you really are not going to unseat?
I think there is potentially regionalization of this. So we're watching some weird things happening in the European Union around.
Partly that's because this is so commoditized, right? That there isn't enough of a differentiator. Joe's cloud service can't do anything that these guys aren't already doing.
I think on a straight up technology basis, nobody's going to disrupt the big
And
three.
at the scale.
Right.
Right.
But I think what's going to happen is this ugly nationalism that we're seeing everywhere now is going to force people in parts of the world to bite the bullet, pay probably more than they should to be able to fit themselves into whatever legal frameworks they have to fit
Are
into.
Amazon, Microsoft, and Google in China, for instance? Are they considered cloud providers in China?
They are.
Through other companies.
Is Baidu or somebody
Yeah,
like that?
they're
Buying
usually
it
a
for
joint venture,
Microsoft,
a 5149 joint venture, and they're bound by certain lot
law.
of rules. And
Yeah.
you know, the biggest challenge is if you're earning a penny of revenue, everything's got to originate in country, which really screwed the CDN business a couple of years ago because there are a lot of people that are making a lot of money doing content distribution into China from outside of China. And literally within a year, I think we took, I don't know, a couple hundred calls literally from people that were getting notices from Akamai and other companies that we're going to have to change the agreement. And so I think that these walls, these regulatory walls, are actually going to be the biggest inhibitor to this. It's not the technology. Eventually, the technology gets to at least a interoperability, if not a standard, right? But it's going to be all of this regulation and protectionism that goes on.
And a lot of times the leaders are obviously trying to protect their turf.
Right.
But if you look at the explosion of something like TikTok,
Right.
TikTok is I expressly allow you to take my audio and use it again.
Yep.
And if the media industry knew what they were doing, they would have dumped all their data in there. 15 seconds, who cares? 15 seconds of my movie, 15 seconds of my song, who cares? You can use 15 seconds. And they would have dumped it there and kept everyone addicted to their stuff. But what they did is they pulled back. And now you have a billion people self-replicating.
Yeah.
And so they're making all their own content that is moving
You have
further and
little
further
Nas
away.
X, right? Or you have
yeah.
people who are becoming stars
Well,
sui generis.
or people who are just making a funny 15-second thing, or
Yeah.
they're making covers of songs
Right.
like that are kind of an acoustic version, and you see them just replicating through
We've
the
seen this
system.
before, though. Remember when YouTube
YouTube.
started? NBC was all over YouTube, and they said, you better stop that, knock
So
it
then they
off.
did.
And they learned their lesson
Right.
because that was a mistake. Now, Saturday Night Live, I don't even have to watch Saturday Night Live. I can watch it
I
on
mean,
YouTube.
you cannot market today without YouTube,
Yeah.
without Twitter,
Yeah.
without those things.
So they're learning.
I would probably argue, going back to one of the previous questions about the industry, the only industry that's really probably done cloud well is social media and marketing.
Right.
All right, negatives. And we got a number of questions. I'll start with Randall, but these are all of a, you talked a lot, he said this in caps. There was a lot of talk of benefits of the cloud. What detrimental impacts are we seeing? Is it societal, environmental, employment? What about the environmental impact of the cloud?
Well,
Well, I think that is a short term and a long term. I think right now the cloud is drawing a lot of power,
Yes.
and that is using oil. Like let's be clear, like that is, it's burning up oil. Now I think that you're seeing more and more of the cloud infrastructure being, a lot of these companies are working
They could
on
end
it.
up being
Yeah.
leaders because there's such incentive to cut
Right.
costs.
Right.
all these solar things, like Microsoft putting
Water,
data centers
solar,
under
wind.
the ocean.
Yeah.
But I think that the cloud's actually because of the scale, going back to the
Yeah.
scale, if they get serious about sustainability, or actually, let's not even call it sustainability, let's call it green positive,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
The impact on just the aggregation of what they're doing at scale is going to be a hell of a lot more powerful than 2 million data centers spread out across the world, or 200,000 data centers spread out.
And from a human impact, I think a lot of it is that we don't have schools that are preparing people for being useful in this society. So we're basically automating a bunch of skills out of the system and not adding people into what's needed. Almost all of these companies, the reason that Apple has a "you can code" is because they don't have enough coders. You know, like that. They're not doing it. I mean, they're doing it to be nice and everything else, but they know they can see a long-term trajectory that they are way short. I mean, and you know, when you hear someone like say that I'm unemployed and I'm a coder, you're like, what happened? You know, like
It must be really bad.
yeah, something. There's something there I don't understand. You know.
Yeah. But I think there is beginning to be a recognition of that. So 2, maybe 3 years ago, City of Chicago school districts decided that by, I think, 2022 or 2023, don't quote me on the exact date, that if you're going to graduate from high school, you got to speak one foreign language and show basic proficiency in one type of computer coding.
And I think that's good, but I think that, like, for instance, schools are in this old, I mean, we haven't changed schools dramatically for a couple thousand years.
We still teach math the same way we taught math.
You know, we're noticing
Roman
in California,
Empire.
and it's because of the charter school movement and because of the failure of local schools in California, a lot more online schooling. And I think I think what you were going with this is that we can actually do a better job.
And if we could be getting rid of grades, both K through 12 and A through F, if we started leveling up. You know, like, kids understand leveling up, right? You know, so there's a whole bunch of points.
Gamify education.
Gamify the whole thing, because you could not do that until you had big data.
Right.
Like, this is a big data play where you could use big data to help, and you would know more about every student at every moment.
But that gives us a
than you-
related question. People are very concerned about privacy in the cloud. And big data is all well and good. And yeah, government could use big data to make government work better, but a government also can use big data to suppress its citizens, and it has in some countries. And this question is about metadata tracking, but in general, does the cloud, is it good for privacy or bad for privacy?
I say this on Windows Weekly all the time. I don't believe we have any privacy, so
It's over, get over
it's
it.
over.
I don't think we're any more or less private, right? I would argue that fundamentally humans.
We
But
gave
big
it
data,
up.
Right.
but
But-
big data sets give companies a much stronger incentive to collect as much as they
They
can
do.
because they can do so much more with it. When it was siloed in my hard drive in my operations center, it wasn't that useful.
Telemetry.
But look
right?
what, going back to the
Yeah.
Amazon Go store, that's not a grocery play, that's a data play, as everything Amazon does is.
Right.
It's going to be hard to avoid. And the reality is that we're more conscious to it. We haven't had a lot of privacy for a long time.
Privacy is a modern concept, by the way.
Right.
When we all lived in this, there's a great piece on the internet, I wish I could find it. The idea of a private bedroom is of relatively recent origin, in the last few centuries. Everybody slept in one big room together because that's where the fireplace was. So privacy is a newer notion, really.
And the NSA wasn't created in 2010. You know, it was created in 1946.
Yeah.
You know, it's been
Look,
been working pretty
right,
hard
it's,
for a
it's
long
the same,
time.
It's the same thing when my European colleagues talk about, not wanting to host stuff in the U.S. because the U.S. government spies on its citizens, and I'm like, yeah, the French, the German, the Italians, the English, nobody does this, right?
I feel like the governments are seeing a pot of gold now. In fact, there's now a bill that's about to enter Congress that will basically break encryption. That's happened in a number of countries across the world. I think governments see this big data, these cloud storage, these cloud databases as a gold mine.
Well, we have to remember also that on the other side of that, we have to remember that I work all over the world. I do a lot of work in Africa and in relatively remote parts of Asia. We don't have, where I work in Africa, we have walls around every house. We have broken glass across those walls. We have paid security guards and dogs. And then we have, and then at the crossings, you see guys with heavy machine guns, right? That's what it looks like when and the thing is that all of that data that the government is using, we have to be careful of it, and we need to be worried about it. But we have to remember that the reason our life looks the way it looks is because of that data. Because they're scooping up things that happen, and they don't want to talk to us about that because they don't want
There is an opportunity with the sidewalk project that Google's doing up in Toronto. The notion of, and we've talked a lot about what data could help you design a better city.
Yeah.
Right? There's some benefit to it too.
There's huge benefits to it.
So is there a way to balance this?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. One of which is, I have a lot of people in my life that, because of what I do, feel the need to harangue me on privacy, right?
It's your fault.
And well, I mean, I'm a face of an industry apparently, right. And most of the time, on my own time, I don't want to talk about the industry,
right.
But hey, whatever, right? But here's the reality: most of these people, I ask a couple of simple questions. One of which is, do you shred your mail?
My wife actually. My wife actually shreds them.
What do you mean? Well, quite honestly, I think the FBI's last statistic was something like 70% of identity theft is somebody pulling a piece of mail out of the garbage.
Right. Right.
So
we've been immune to the issues.
You're worried about big data,
I know,
Yeah.
right? Which is maybe 20% of your existence,
Right.
Even if it's 50. But you're not doing do you lock the door to your back to your from your garage to your house, right?
So we have a few minutes left. I don't want to end on this dystopian note.
Can we go back to the plague?
Let's each of us talk about what the cloud, what the future of the cloud, the positive benefits the cloud's going to bring us.
Oh, I have to be first.
You get to be. Well, you want to be last? No, you should start.
All right. think
'Cause
of
you're a very
something
positive
positive.
person.
I'm a positive person. So I guess I don't ever think about this question because I just assume the cloud will become a bigger and bigger part of my life and people's lives ahead of us. And I'm not afraid of that future. I feel like it's making my life better. I mean, yes, there are issues like facial recognition that have to be regulated, and we have to come up with real policies to regulate these kind of ethical issues, right? But I don't know. I'm not afraid of the future because I feel like the positives are going to outweigh the negatives, especially when I think about things like healthcare, right? Like I live in New York City, and I can tell you, when you go to a doctor in New York City, it's probably the same in many places, but there you would think your medical records would be more automated and in the cloud maybe, but no, they aren't. And so I just can see nothing but upside to automating and improving the way that the cloud manages things like medical records, like education. I mean, I just am more, I guess I'm a glass half full person. Or maybe more than half full, maybe all full. Yeah, I'm less afraid than optimistic about this. And I think the big vendors are going to get bigger. There'll still be a place for smaller vendors because there are niches and verticals where those companies will need to be used and partner with the bigger vendors. So yeah, I'm optimistic.
Thank you. Alex?
Somebody has to be.
I think that there's what I'm really interested in, and I've seen a couple attempts at this, but I think that someone's going to figure out how to consumerize the cloud experience. And what I mean by that is building very easy to use tools that an average person can use to build their own mini apps. Every time you bring this up to developers, they're like, well, there's all these things you won't be able to do. Sure, there's always things you won't be able to do, but there's a lot of things you can. I programmed a radio station in 1990 with HyperCard. Just dragging things and pulling them around and building something. And the thing is, I figured out how to do that without really writing any code. And we're missing that. And there are so many things. Like right now, I wanted to create something that turns on my hot tub and then emails me when it's ready and tells me what temperature it is, and and it's a sensor and a thing. And right now, I'm using Arduino and I'm putting it together.
Like everything should be able.
But I'm
to
like,
do
this
that.
should just be should be a
Drag
nodal
and drop.
interface where I'm dragging little nodes, saying take this data and pass it to these 3 nodes, and then take these and pass them to these. And there's so many things that I think an average user could use if I could go up to AWS or to Azure and have this little interface. I want you to go grab this data that maybe I pay a penny for or whatever, and I want you to pass it into this and do this calculation, and I want you to pass simple
like we're
things.
so close to that.
And I think you'd end up with an explosion, of usage, because people would be able to fix everyday problems that they have with computing, whether it's local or in the cloud.
Right.
If it was just an easy interface that they could throw together.
I need the light switch to talk to the thermostat, to talk to
And
the
there are
oven.
things. There's
And
I know,
a drag
power
and drop.
apps,
There's
right?
if this,
There's
then
low
that.
code, no
Right.
code.
There's things that are starting that direction, but it's not like I can just open up an interface and drag this and
Right.
and then pump that and have it either show up there or send it to me in an
Yeah.
email. Like every time you see this here, I want you to do this here.
We've got
But if
computing.
this and that.
We've got computing.
It's close. It's close. It's still a little. Again, it's a little geeky.
I would prefer our sponsor, Zapier. It's we've got sensors everywhere. We've got computing at the edge.
Right.
But what we need is an API and an easy way to access that, and it needs to be global and universal. But I tell you, if you ever go to the home automation pavilion at CES and watch that Tower of Babel
Oh, geez. Yeah.
for more than a decade, you start to wonder, well, I wonder if we're ever going to get here. Mike, give us a positive way to
So I believe in technology as empowering,
Yeah.
right? Not as dystopian, not as limiting, right? And I think the interesting thing about cloud and this whole era we're in is a couple of things. The open data movement, right, in cities and things like that. So in Chicago, just about everything now is available within a legally mandated period of time online. And what that's done is it's created citizen empowerment, right? That allows somebody to go out and say, I want to know how many times the police drew their gun in my neighborhood.
Right.
I want to know how many times the water company misbilled somebody, right? I want to know why the tax money that I'm paying for luxury tax is not where it's being invested in this city. The other thing I think, and I think of a friend of mine who I worked with many years ago in a startup back in the day, that after great success decided to go back into his community in Inglewood in Chicago, one of the worst neighborhoods, one of the most impoverished. You want to talk about left behind neighborhoods that there is in the city. I mean, the schools pay bounties for teachers to come and teach there, all right? And 5 years ago, 10 years ago even, he was trying to get people in that community to embrace technology that had barely money to live, let alone anything else, right? And what he's told me is back then, he used to fundraise, right? You know, go out and pass the hat and do events, and they'd have art fairs and rap-offs and all these different things. And they would pass the hat and go put the bite on the corporate sponsors. He'd call me, hey, Mike, you know, we need $1,200. Who do you know that's got, you know, who do you know got an expense check this, or a commission check this week that I go put the bite on? And what he said, he goes, you know, now when we're doing something in a community, we're going to build an app so that kids can notify on an Android or a phone that they're leaving school and they're walking home. They don't have to have the phone. The parent has the phone. So at the school, they put the tablets in, and you click on your button, and there's this little app that runs up in Google's cloud, and the kid authenticates with the biometric thing. It's I'm who I'm in. It's 3:58. Where are you going? I'm leaving now. I'm going home. Right? Don't have to buy the kid a phone. But something like that, it costs him $75 a month to run that for that school. It cost them about $5,000 to build everything, which was donated, right? So that's my challenge to everybody here. This isn't, investing in our communities with technology isn't $100,000 in building a computer lab somewhere. It's taking these skills and this knowledge and these resources that we use all day and finding one life to change, one problem to solve, one piece of data that changes our view on our governments and our communities and our cities. That's the power of what we do. It's not about, I mean, it is about driving revenue and creating the next best app and all this other stuff. But at the end of the day, we didn't figure out how to bang two rocks together to make money, right? We bang two rocks together to build the next tool, to build the fire, to build the knife or the hammer. And we got to start thinking about that again and start investing not in these massive programs, but on a very personal level in our communities. And the community can be where you live or in a community of people that you're part of. And without doing that, we get the dystopian future that we all fear, right? So that's where I think cloud is really, it's leveled the playing field. It's allowed people with $50 in their pocket to make a difference by using technology.
Well said. Thank you, Mike. Mike Dorosh, Gartner Group, Alex Lindsay, this is 090 Media, Mary Jo Foley, Windows Weekly, and allaboutmicrosoft.com. What a great panel. I want to thank you all for coming out, braving the coronavirus to actually be face-to-face with other people. This has been a really great hour and a half. We're going to make a podcast out of this. It'll appear at twit.tv/events, probably later in the day, maybe Sunday? Okay, we're going to really work on it. We're going to polish it up. It's going to be. We're going to put a beginning and end on it and put it out.
Wait a minute, this doesn't happen magically?
We'll do it. It's magic. It'll be in the cloud on Sunday. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate it. And thanks to Worldwide Tech for being great hosts. Bye-bye, everybody.